Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Skill Up session today, analyzing your dissertation's qualitative data with Dr. Linda Bloomberg. My name is Jenna Johnson. I am a graduate learning specialist with the Academic Training Academy. And I just want to cover a couple of things, housekeeping items before I send it on over to Dr. Bloomberg. We are recording the session today. And it will be posted generally within about 24 hours. It'll show up in the Graduate Studies Support Center Skill Up page. And if you have questions throughout the session, you can go ahead and type them into the Q&A form located at the bottom of your Zoom window. Chat is also enabled. I will be monitoring that, but sometimes it's just easier to see the questions if they're in the Q&A. And then we do also have the closed captions enabled at the moment. So if you want to turn them on or off at any time, you can just go down to the bottom of your Zoom window and see the CC button where it says captions. And with that, I'm going to turn it on over to Dr. Bloomberg.
Thank you so much, Jenna, and thank you for your department for offering these webinars, the Skill Up series for our students. I'm always very happy to present on qualitative dissertation work and qualitative research in general. So let's get started and let's get started and let's just move through the process of me just explaining what we're going to be looking at today, the way that I've structured this webinar, and what I hope for us to achieve. So qualitative research is a huge field in itself, multifaceted, multidisciplinary. It cuts across multiple disciplines. And so there are many different aspects to it. But some of the key characteristics of qualitative research is that it promotes a really deep understanding of a research problem from the perspective of the research participants themselves. Remember, in qualitative research, we don't refer to research subjects, as would be the case in quantitative. We refer to research participants. The overall emphasis is on exploration, discovery, and description. Qualitative researchers work both inductively and deductively, as we'll see further on in terms of their analysis processes. The goal of analysis is to reduce very large volumes of information and material by way of coding to identify themes. That's the essence of qualitative data analysis. And the researcher's primary role is to immerse themselves in the data to determine what the findings actually mean. So we're really looking at the deeper understanding of the findings and what the findings themselves are telling us. So in this webinar, my hope is that you will learn about the process of qualitative data analysis, and I'm going to provide a hands-on example to illustrate how codes and themes are applied and developed. Before I continue, I just want to mention that I am going to be stopping at various points along the way in this presentation to take some questions. And Jenna will be scanning the chat and the Q&A, and she'll let me know what questions have arisen at those points. We'll also have a chance at the very end to take questions and have some discussion. So just to step back a moment, I'd like to make very clear the key differences between qualitative and quantitative research, because these differences also play out very specifically in the process of analysis. So quantitative research is very broad. And my colleague, Dr. Mil Werbeloff, a long-standing colleague of mine, these are her slides, and she talks about quantitative research as being similar to plowing the field. The field is very broad, and you plow the field on a relatively surface level. In contrast, quantitative research is very, very specific and deep, and so as opposed to the plow, which is a broader, shallower, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but it's not as deep as an intense analysis. We're drilling down to the very essence of what the findings mean here with qualitative research. Now, another key difference is that quantitative analysis uses very large samples, non-probability samples, random sampling, and that's a characteristic of quantitative research. In contrast, qualitative research uses much smaller samples of people, and these are purposefully selected. So we use what is called purposeful sampling techniques, and there are a variety of different techniques to sample to create a research sample, but the research sample is much, much smaller. So we're looking at a very in-depth exploration with a smaller group of people. And we don't intend for this to be generalizable to an entire population because it cannot be representative of an entire population as quantitative research can. This small sample gives us very deep, important information about a smaller sample. And what we hope for is a term that is used in qualitative research, transferability, so that the reader or the viewer can determine whether the findings of a qualitative study can be applicable to their own context or their own setting. So again, just to reiterate, it's not about generalizability, as would be the case with a very large sample. It's about transferability with the smaller purposeful sample. So let's move on to what qualitative data analysis is really all about. The key process of qualitative analysis is thematic analysis. And we're going to be looking at thematic analysis in detail today with a hands-on example. But there is also what is called text or discourse analysis and visual analysis, where one can analyze actual visual or textual material. With any of these strategies, the focus is on data condensation or data reduction. So remember, what we usually get in qualitative research are the transcripts of interviews, focus groups, etc. So we have reams and reams of papers of direct verbatim transcription. In other words, this is exactly what our participants are saying, unchanged, undocketed, exactly in their words. And we can land up in an hour-long interview with a lot of information where people are talking about what they think, their perspectives in relation to the questions that we're asking them. So what we have to do with this voluminous amount of information is condense it or reduce it, and that is the process of data analysis. Now, analysis can be manual, or we can make use of data analysis software. An important point that I always make, and that is written about in the qualitative books, is that only a researcher can interpret the findings. So whether you use the software analysis or you're doing it manually, in the end, the human being, the researcher themselves, have to interpret the findings. The software cannot do that for you. They can do the analysis, they can help with the coding and the themes, but they cannot actually interpret. That's a human function. Now, another thing which I'm going to be getting to a lot further along is that the findings of qualitative studies are reported as narrative samples of verbatim quotations from our research participants. And this narrative serves as thick description, which Clifford Geertz referred to in 1973, which is characteristic of qualitative research. So we want to cull from all of our voluminous amount of transcriptual materials, we want to pick out the most important quotes and analyze these. And you'll see how we do it a little bit further on. Now I'm not going to talk about trustworthiness on this slide because I actually have it over here. So with qualitative research, there are 4 criteria of trustworthiness. Remember, we don't refer to reliability and we don't refer to validity. Those are particularly quantitative terminology. What we refer to are the 4 trustworthiness criteria, which are credibility, confirmability, dependability, and transferability, which I've just mentioned now. Transferability takes the place of generalizability. And each trustworthiness criterion is associated with various strategies to address and satisfy that criterion. And the researcher will be employing specific strategies to address each of these 4 criteria. And you will be learning more about this in your qualitative courses here at National University. Both EDR 8400 and EDR 8400 and EDR 8206 are 2 courses in the doctoral program that really go into a lot of detail with regard to addressing trustworthiness. What you need to do in your study will be to describe in detail the analytic approach that you used, and you will have to show how you got from your raw data, being the people's words, your research participants' words in their transcripts, to your conclusions. How did you get from A to B? What was your process? I also like to talk about what I call the black box approach. A black box approach is where you would put all your information into a black box and it's kind of secret. That's not the way that qualitative research works. We cannot use a black box approach. We have to use a very transparent approach. We have to be very open with our readers about how we analyze the data, what kind of codes we applied, how we eliminated or condensed our codes, how we arrived at themes, and in relation to that, how we then arrive at our conclusions and recommendations for our study. So we have to explain our strategies to reduce researcher bias and also to be very transparent. And reflexivity, which is a concept that is very critical to qualitative research, supports the transparency of your study. Researcher reflexivity is how the researcher is able to think critically about the study, about themselves, about their participants, and about the data that they find. And so that transparency is really an integral part of qualitative research. Now, this slide is an example of all the different types of analytic strategies and processes and approaches that one can use in a quantitative study. It's very numerically oriented. There are graphs, there are charts like this. But with qualitative research, what we're looking for are the verbatim quotations of our participants. In other words, our participants' voice. First, I'm going to go back here. Our participants' voices that we gather are our data. We are not looking at numerical information. We're looking at narrative information. And that is a key difference between quantitative and qualitative analysis. So our data is going to be words, transcripts. So let's start with coding, because coding is the first step in the analytic process. And what we have to do is narrow down our data by the use of codes. We're engaging in data condensation, as I mentioned previously. And we're going to be assigning an alphanumeric system or some sort of naming system to pieces of our data, which then become our codes. So the purpose of the codes is to capture and catalog the core elements of the data, which are the transcripts. And this allows the researcher to have an overview of all the pieces of data as these relate to the research questions of the study. Remember, every study has to answer your study's research questions. So this is also how you present your findings per research question. So that is something to bear in mind all the while that you are coding your data. And in a few moments, we're going to get to the hands-on example, and I hope that that will make things a lot clearer. So there are various coding techniques in qualitative research, and the researcher works on two levels, inductively and deductively. Inductive analysis is like a bottom-up analysis. We're building patterns and themes from the bottom up. The themes are grounded in the data. Deductive analysis is more of a top-down process where the researcher will be reviewing the data according to their theoretical or conceptual framework to determine if the data can support each theme or whether additional information is needed through further coding. So you'll also see this when you get to the data analysis process of your research study. You'll be working inductively and deductively. You'll be building patterns and themes, but you'll also have in the back of your mind your conceptual or theoretical framework that will help you guide the development of these codes and themes. Okay, I'm going to stop there for one moment to take any questions that may have come up, because I've actually given you a lot of information. So I'm sure people are thinking about things. So Jenna, can you tell me if anyone has already popped a question or a comment in the box? And if not, we can open it up to questions for a few minutes now, live.
So I don't have any questions as of right now. Everybody might still be thinking.
Okay. And if there are no questions, it's okay, because I will be stopping again. But has anyone got a question on the top of their head right now that they want to throw out that I can help with?
Actually,
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, ma'am, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, it looks like we have someone in the chat who wanted to know if deductive or inductive analysis is more common.
They're actually used in conjunction. So one would be doing inductive, in other words, developing a bottom-up approach, looking at your data and seeing what codes pop out at you. But also deductively, you'll have in the back of your mind your conceptual or theoretical framework, which is giving you some ideas of what the codes can be as well from the literature. So you're going to be using, even subconsciously, a kind of balance between the two. Was it Malik that had a question?
Yes, ma'am. So my question is with phenomenological qualitative research, since the focus of that research is actually on the researcher themselves, how does one deal with reflexivity and the fact that they themselves have to throw themselves into the research and not necessarily bias, but just the concept of reflexivity. Now, I understand that the real topic of the researcher is the subject, and they are not the subject. But in phenomenological research, they themselves, it almost seems to be inseparable in certain ways, if you understand the question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I want to just say that in all of qualitative research, the researcher is the instrument of data collection and data analysis. So whatever research design one is using, whether it's phenomenology, case study, narrative inquiry, action research, ethnography, etc., grounded theory, all of those,
Right.
the researcher has to engage in reflexivity to uncover and be aware of their own biases.
Mhm.
That said, all of research except for ethnography, autoethnography, is where the researcher would be doing a study on their own personal life or personal experiences. Phenomenology is really about the lived experiences of others, of the research participants. So with phenomenology, it would be the same process as with case study or grounded theory or narrative inquiry. Your research participants are giving you the data. The data is not coming from yourself. The only
Right.
time, as I say, the data would be coming from your own experience is if one is conducting an autoethnography, and that's not typically done with dissertation research.
Got it.
So I hope that answered. Thank you.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on?
No, you are good to go.
Okay, so as I say, I'm going to be stopping again, so there'll be more opportunities. So let's look at the coding process itself. Analysis can be done with specific words, where we could look at word repetitions, keywords within context, etc. Analysis can also be conducted on larger blocks of text, where we compare and contrast these blocks of text. Coding requires a constant comparison. So we're reviewing and noting how sections or words or sentences are similar and different from each other. And we're physically manipulating the text by marking them, using highlighters, cutting and pasting, sorting. So it really is a very hands-on experience. And you're going to see so when I go through an actual example with you in a few minutes. The coverage of the data by codes is related to the research questions, as I said earlier. And you can also code a text segment with multiple codes, but you really have to ask yourself, what is the main idea being conveyed? And that would present you with an idea for the code or the theme. Also, what I said earlier, there must be clear explanations provided for the way that you code and conduct your analysis, and also for any exceptions. In other words, if you have not coded certain words, phrases, or portions, you have to be available and willing to explain why you have not coded those or why you have chosen to eliminate those. Remember, one of the key aspects based on the whole idea of transparency is really to give voice to our participants and let the data speak for itself. So if you're going to manipulate or omit certain pieces of data, that would actually violate ethical principles. One has to, once your research participants have taken the time and been gracious enough to answer the questions that you've posed to them, you really do need to analyze their transcripts holistically and not decide to eliminate or omit any part of it. Now, I also just want to say a few things about coding versus content analysis. Now, remember, because qualitative research is based on narrative information rather than numerical information, as is the case of quantitative research, Counting codes is really a quantitative activity, and it's not really part of qualitative research. So counting codes, which one would do in content analysis, is not the way that one analyzes qualitative data. Counting can provide a useful indicator for the importance of a given code. You can note that a code has appeared 20 or 40 or 80 times, but that really isn't part of the deeper aspect of analysis. If you decide to count, it's essential that you also think about how to use those counts and what they imply for later stages of analysis. And this is a quote from Eliot. And it's really important to note that if you are going to count, in addition to doing a deeper analysis, you'll have to think very carefully about how to use those counts and how to explain the significance of the counting. So, as I said right at the very beginning, the typical way that qualitative data analysis occurs is through coding in order to develop themes. And this whole process is called thematic analysis, thematic being based on themes. So groups of codes can create categories that then become themes. Remember, different authors speak about all of this in different ways. So sometimes an author may use the word group, sometimes they may use the word category, sometimes they usually would use the word themes. So all of these things are just to indicate that if one takes a group of codes, and you'll see again when I demonstrate this with a live example, that group of codes then becomes a theme. So the theme is the aggregate of a number of codes. Coded transcript quotations are sorted and organized according to research questions, as I said earlier, because remember, your study's purpose is to answer the research questions. The study is based on three key aspects: your research problem, your research purpose, which addresses the problem, and then your research questions, which address your research purpose. So the alignment has to be very clear between problem, purpose, and research questions. Now, in addition to the themes that are clearly explicit, researchers can also search for themes that are missing or absent. So you may do your coding, develop your themes, and then based on what you know about the topic, because remember, you will have done a huge amount of reading in that area that you're interested in, and you may think, I never saw anything to do with X, Y, and Z. Let me go back to my data and see why this seems to be missing. And if it is in fact missing, that is significant in itself. Why are people not talking about that aspect or that topic or that experience? So remember, what's missing or absent in your transcript is as important as what you see there, because much can be learned from a text by what is not spoken about it. And these are considered unspoken themes. So discussion of all of the themes, the spoken and the unspoken, creates a vivid picture that tells the story of your overall study. Remember, in qualitative research, you're really trying to tell the story of others' experiences. You're giving voice to others. And that is why the ethical aspect of really being authentic, not changing anything, and really allowing your participants' experiences to speak for themselves. So I'm just going to summarize this before we move to the example. And so the summary goes like this. You would review and explore your data to identify core ideas. You reread the data and examine the data multiple times until you're so familiar with it that you can start coding it. You then sort your coded data into categories, which become your themes. You then revise your coding scheme, where you add or eliminate or collapse your codes. Usually in a qualitative study, because of the voluminous amount of narrative information that you land with after you've done 6 or 8 or 12 one-hour-long interviews, you can imagine how much there is for you to look at. You may have hundreds of codes, but that's not feasible and manageable. What you then have to do is go through your entire code list and start collapsing them. In other words, you would say code A, Z, and X seem to be saying the same thing. Let's collapse them and create a new code which covers A, B, A, Z, and X. So that is what is part of the coding process. It's also not just as simple as, okay, I'll apply codes and now I have a coding scheme. That coding scheme would probably be revised multiple times before you have your final coding scheme. And then again, you write out your study's findings per research question. And then the final stage of analysis, which I mentioned at the beginning, cannot be done by software. It can only be done by you as a human researcher. is to ask yourself, what do the findings mean? And here you refer to the literature and prior research to help you ground your findings in what has already been said about this topic and what you find to be unique. So in other words, what is the real meaning behind the findings? That is the final interpretive step that a researcher would take. Okay, so the coded verbatim transcripts are what is key, and now we're going to get to some examples. But before we do, I'm going to stop again, just in case there are any questions. And Jenna, if you can just let me know if there are, or if someone wants to ask one now.
Well, we actually just had one pop up in the chat, and it says, how do you reconcile an absent theme in your data collection, what's not said, with what is commonly found in research?
Well, if you have a hunch, or if in your experience you have known or been witness to or experienced something and it's not coming out in the findings, for some reason no one has spoken about it or mentioned it, you could go back to the literature and the research and see if it has been written about. And if it hasn't, then you are able as a qualitative researcher to raise that theme and to try and interpret for yourself why you think it has not been spoken about. So either you would refer back to the literature where there would be some evidence of it. And if there is no evidence, then you've actually discovered something quite important, that somebody or group of people have not spoken about this aspect of the topic or this take on the topic. Why? What can be going on here? What's the deeper meaning? What might be the reason for this? And again, that's part of your interpretation as a human researcher. You can see why a qualitative software program could never help you with that. Maybe AI could, but that wouldn't be ethical. So you have to go and dig deeper into your own critical thinking abilities, put your researcher hat on and try and determine what could be some possible reasons for people not mentioning this or not addressing this or skipping past this or even avoiding it. Like what could be going on? And those kind of findings are really interesting. It doesn't always happen in every study, but when it does, it gives you the opportunity to really dig deeper and to try and understand that experience or your topic, even on a much deeper level. So thanks for that question.
We have one more too.
Okay.
It relates to authenticity. If the participants are speaking in their dialects, would the researcher transcribe in that dialect?
If there is a foreign language or dialect, studies have been known to use interpreters or translators. So it really is most helpful if you're interviewing or working with people in a language that you're familiar with, because otherwise it's going to be a matter of using translators or interpreters, and that really adds a huge layer of difficulty to you as the researcher in terms of understanding what your participants have really told you. And remember, with translation, things can be missed. Sometimes certain languages have certain nuances that are not directly translatable, and there you may miss the subtleties that somebody has been speaking about. So it is possible, but it's not the norm to be using different languages or dialects. Also remember, you as a qualitative researcher are creating your own research sample by way of purposeful sampling. So you will be choosing who will be in your research sample. And you also have to be very ethical about that. You don't want to eliminate anyone, but you want a sample that is a group of individuals who meet certain criteria to be part of your study. Now, if that means people that speak a different language or dialect, then that will be something to consider and to think more deeply about. Anyone in the audience have a question?
That is all that I see for now in the chat and Q&A.
Okay, perfect. So I have a feeling there will be questions later on, because we're now going to get to some fun part of this, which is actually looking at some transcripts and ways to code them. So here you see a coded transcript example. This is just for purposes of illustration. It's tiny, it's 1 page. An interview is never this short. An half an hour interview even can be like 15 or 20 pages. So this is just a small snippet of an example that I want to show you. So what you would start doing in your coding process, and this is a process that I really like myself, is using different color markers. And remember, this is really easy to do as a Word document on a computer. You don't have to print out your transcripts. If you want to, you can, and you can actually physically mark them, or you can use them as Word documents, as I often do. And what you do is you start reading through your transcript and then making notes or like highlighting certain portions that you think stand out based on your research questions. You always have your research questions in the back of your mind, and you know what your study is trying to look at in essence. So you will be attuned to what is important to code. Now, you don't have to code every single word and every single piece of information. But remember, if you leave out something, then that speaks for itself. And you would have to answer to yourself as to why you're leaving it out. So as much as possible, code your entire transcript, maybe even more than I have done over here. So as you go along in the yellow color, you're reading and you highlight this portion over here, what is said here. And then you come down here and the same idea is popping up. So the color would be the same. And then again over here, the person is talking about the same thing. Then you go to your next student. Oh, sorry, still in the same student. And here the person says something different. So here you could use a different color. And then here, something even different, different again, not the same as the pink or the yellow. And then you would code that in a different color and so on. So as you go through your transcript, you're actually highlighting and making notes as to what the person is telling you and trying to actually like fit the pieces of the puzzle together by breaking down what the person has told you. And at the end, you're actually going to build it up. You're going to like bring all of your pieces together to create your coding scheme. So here we're still breaking down. We're doing what's called data reduction. Here again, the person spoke a little bit about the same concept here, which seems to be something about financial. And then they spoke over here about something that was related to over here, what they said. And then here, the blue, something new popped up again. So this is what a coded transcript can look like. Here's another coded transcript. Here's another participant who answered the same questions. And remember, you have to code consistently. So your yellow coding from the first person, if you're coding all these ideas in yellow, you would use for the next participant and all the participants, you'd use your same color on their transcript. But as you can see, this person didn't say anything related to the yellow. They had something that you find here with the blue, which we had with the other participant. Here's something new, which is this darker blue. And I think these two colors here were different as well. So remember, you would have your color codes and you'd be coding, and also you'd be making notes on the side as to what the colors are standing for. So for example, if we go back to the first one, the yellow had something to do with finances. Funding, financial burden, financial guidance, securing funding. So all of the yellow has to do with finances and funding. The purple here, the pink, is managing the workload. So that's something to do with a workload. Burnout is this gray color here. Mental health support, feeling overwhelmed, burnout, relentless pressure. That's all a different code. And then here, building skills and the academic route is something in blue. And then with your second person, the blue is the same. The green is hearing their stories about the challenge, etc., etc. So as you're going through all of your transcripts and highlighting the key segments that stand out to you, you're also on the side making a note of what your color coding is referring to, so that you keep a running sort of legend of what you're actually doing. So remember, it's a pretty technical process, but it's also a very critical, deep thinking process, because you have to remain open to what you're seeing. And you also want to really not make errors with what your participants are telling you. You don't want to code it incorrectly. Now, coding incorrectly can happen. We're all human. if you go back and you think like, what this person said over here really should be in gray. This is not a separate code. This really fits with this and this. So you can go back, obviously, and make corrections. And that's part of the process, because qualitative analysis is not a linear process. It's a very iterative and somewhat messy process. And I think to be a really good qualitative researcher means to embrace that messiness and be open to the fact that it's not going to be neat. It's not going to be pretty. It's going to be pretty messy at times. And a lot of us want things to fit neatly into boxes, but this is really not the case with qualitative. And also, it's not the case in terms of being really authentic and open to whatever the research is giving you and telling you. So we have to be very open to what we receive from our research participants, and it may go against the grain. It may not be what we expected at all, but that is part of qualitative research. As I said earlier, giving voice to our research participants, really letting the data speak for itself. So here's an example of what a coding scheme could look like. Firstly, we have our different color codes. So I'm just going to go through these as an example. Yellow was to do with financial burden. We called that code financial burden. Green was hearing others' challenges. The purple is workload. The gray is about burnout and mental health. This other color green here, the more mossy color green, is a lack of advisor support. Blue is about knowledge of limited career prospects in academia. Again, here we have the financial guidance, the mental health support, etc., etc. Now, what we're going to do now with all of our codes is to start developing themes. And remember, this is a very, very abbreviated process that I'm presenting here, because when you actually do it, it's hours and hours of work. This is just a very brief snapshot of the process itself. If you take financial burden and hearing others' challenges, those two could kind of go together to create a theme such as the tipping point for leaving their program, for leaving their program of study. The reasons could be financial or challenges, and so that could fit together under a theme like this. The ongoing struggle could be due to workload, burnout, lack of advisor support, and limited career prospects. So that could be another theme that we could call the ongoing challenge or the ongoing struggle. Remember, these are also all these themes would fit under each of your research questions. So I'm just discussing it in like broader terms here. I don't have a specific study in mind, but with your study and your research questions, you would be answering each of your questions in terms of themes and codes that make up those themes. So remember, the themes are actually the answers to the research question. And here are possible supports. That's another theme. Financial guidance is over here. Mental health support, alternative career paths, connecting with fellow students, advisor support, and support and mentorship outside of your immediate academic circles. So these are just examples of what a coding scheme would start to look like, with your codes listed under possible themes. And remember, as I said earlier, a theme is really just a group of codes. So this theme would have a group of codes underneath it, and so on with each of the themes that you develop. And again, as I said a few minutes ago, nothing is set in stone. So once you've done a first iteration of your coding scheme and a first go through of the coding process, you then go through it again and see where you can collapse or join codes or eliminate codes that maybe are not important or don't make sense to you anymore, until you have what you consider a final workable coding scheme. Now, what you would then do, a final step with your coding scheme in terms of getting ready to present your findings in your chapter, is you would take your coding scheme. This is exactly the same as the coding scheme that I had on the previous page. So you take that coding scheme and then you begin to insert the relevant participant quotations with each code. So where people spoke about burnout or mental health, you would then go and gather all of those quotations, and you could do it on an Excel spreadsheet. You would actually copy and paste them verbatim into the space with each code. So as you can see here, again, just an example, very abbreviated, but your codes would be supported by your quotations, and so the quotations become the evidence of your theme. So in summary, before we stop again for questions, coding can be applied to every sentence. It can be applied to phrases or words. But remember, you want to try and code as much as possible so that you're not leaving out portions or segments, because that would really be, as I said, doing a disservice to your participants who've taken the time to really answer all of your questions. And so why not code all of it? The process is complex and iterative, much, much more than I'm presenting here. As I said, this is just a snapshot for the process that I'm referring to, which is thematic analysis. And this is just, as I say, a very brief overview of a much, much more complex process. So that said, we have about 18 minutes left, and I'm very happy to take questions, discuss aspects of this, go back to some of the slides. If anyone wants to go back to any of the slides, just let me know. But that really is the presentation itself in a nutshell of a process that is very, very complex and extended and extensive. And information was taken from our book, the 5th edition of Completing Your Qualitative Dissertation. There are also other wonderful books on data analysis, qualitative data analysis, and I've listed these in the references here. I've referred to a few of these in the presentation as well with citations. And so when you get this from Emily, you will have this entire presentation with these references. And I really do urge you to take a look at them because there are some excellent sources here.
Dr. Bloomberg, we do have a couple of questions in the chat, but I do also see that someone has their hand up.
Okay, so should we take the live person first? I think it's Siobhan. I can see one hand up, and maybe there are more, and then we can go to the Q&A.
Perfect. Siobhan, you have your hand up?
Sorry, you're muted, Siobhan. Oh, there.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry, my hello. My question is this: just yesterday, I finished my signature project where I had to basically create a emergent theme using. So it was very similar to what you just did. So I feel as though yes, I'm doing it correct. So you are you doing it correctly if you're using the same quotation or the same chunk of text for a different theme?
That can happen, but generally we like to keep the themes unique. So if you're using a quotation, you have to make a choice where it fits. Does it fit under theme A or theme B? What is the person really saying here? So usually it would really only fit under one theme, and that would be typical if you've done a very extensive analysis and also revised your coding scheme multiple times to be sure that your themes stand alone, that each theme is specific. Now, remember, the themes do overlap because they all are talking about, addressing your research questions, but they are also separate and distinct.
Yes.
So typically you will not have the same quotation under two themes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see also Jeanette thanks for your question, Siobhan. I see also Jeanette has their hand up.
Yes, hello. I'm right now on my section 3, and I'm having the situation where I'm putting in a lot of detail, right? And I keep on getting back that I need to make it shorter. But my question is, when we have a theme, how many quotes or how many the idea of the participants should be placed under the themes? Because sometimes I have various participants that maybe have contributed with what they have shared and their experience, and I feel that it's valuable to put it in. But since I have to keep on cutting down, I feel that I'm leaving certain voices out. So how could we manage that part? I don't know if I explained it.
Yeah, you did. That's a really good question. Typically, this is something that you and your chair will discuss because people have different ideas on this. My idea is to let all participants have a voice. So if you have 10 participants in your study and you've asked all of those 10 the same question and all 10 have answered question questions and they all have addressed the theme, I would use a quote from each of your participants, at least one, that addresses that theme, so that all participants are represented equally and fairly and equitably. Sometimes people don't contribute to a theme. Sometimes some people's answers don't address a certain theme, and that's fine. But I would make sure that if they do, each participant gets a chance to have their voice heard. And that's why the findings chapters can be extensive as well. Remember, you don't want it to be so long that it's like just, unmanageable and no one can even bother to read it because it's too long. You have to be very creative and also very clear in how you want to present your themes. And again, if you keep them under research questions, it'll be manageable because each research question is asking one question. Each research question is a single question. And so your themes are your answers. You may have 4 themes under research question 1 and 2 themes under research question 2 and 5 themes under research question 3, but you then have to bring your participants in to substantiate each of those themes. I hope that answers. But again, talk with your chair and try and, come to a mutual understanding of what the findings should look like in terms of extensiveness and representativeness.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Bloomberg, we do also have a question related to a case study, and I'm actually curious about the answer as well. So the question is, if you are completing a qualitative case study at a specific workplace, can you interview participants that no longer work at the workplace? So if someone retired during, let's say, my dissertation, but they were like a big part of the organizational problem, is it okay to keep them in there?
It all depends on your focus of your research. So for example, if you create a sample of educators in K through 12 at a particular school, and then one of those educators leaves the school or retires, you would just mention that and describe that in your sample. You could say that halfway through the study, participant B left the school. It doesn't mean you have to throw participant B away, because life happens and people move on. So people situations may shift. As long as your sample is carefully and purposefully selected, if someone moves away, I don't think that would be problematic, but you may want to state that to be very transparent and upfront in your methodology section.
And I actually have seen that in some of the research articles where they've stated, certain participants quit the company that they were doing the study
Right.
at. So thank you for confirming.
You're welcome. And then some studies may include people that are currently in a situation or an experience and those who are not. You can set up your research sample any way you want to address your study's problem and purpose. So you may have current teachers and teachers that have retired all in the same sample, because you're asking them about a particular experience and they've all had that experience. Those that have left had the experience while they were there. So they're talking about it from the past tense. Some people are talking about it in the present tense, but they've all had that same experience. It doesn't, you can do a study like that. That would not be a problem.
Perfect. And then we have another one in the chat talking about, as novice researchers, who is going to look over the research, the codes, the themes to ensure that nothing has been left out?
What one typically does is what's called peer review. So you could call on a colleague. Now, remember, because of confidentiality and ethical issues, no identifying information can be on your transcripts. You cannot have people's names, addresses, phone numbers, or any identifying information. You would have your pseudonyms. So you would call your participants by fictitious names. I actually prefer that much more than calling them participant A, B, C, D, or participant 1, 2, 3, 4, because qualitative research should be personable. People should be brought to life. Their voices are what we're looking at. So it kind of goes against the grain to just call them by numbers or letters. So I did in my own dissertation, and I recommend to my students, just give them names, fictitious names. You can pick them. You can call them anything. They can be any language, any culture, whatever. But so you would, you would, as I say, you'd be removing all real information, and you can then refer to your colleagues who you feel you can trust and who have a certain level of integrity and understanding. Explain what your research is about, tell them what your research questions are, and say to them, look, I've coded this transcript. You don't have to give all of them to them, but you could say, here are 2 different transcripts. These are my codes. Can you please go through this and see if this makes sense to you? Do you think I'm off the mark? Do you think what I'm saying is making sense? Do these codes make sense? Do they seem reflective of what the research participants are actually saying? And that's a really good way to address that. You could also run it by your dissertation chair. You could say, could you please look at these transcripts for me? What do you think about these codes? Does this make sense? Do you have any suggestions? Does anything seem off? Or, does anything seem like it's an error? What feedback can you give me? So that's a way that qualitative research is very collaborative, where you actually are trying to understand your process more than just from the way you see it, but by bringing in a collaboration. You can even give it to 2 different people and, ask them both to take a look at the transcripts for you. And then you'll have an even clearer idea of what 2 different people are seeing from their viewpoint.
Thank you. And we do have a hand raised.
Okay, I see that's Malik.
Yes, thank you. This is a kind of weird question, right? But I'm sure it happens, even though something has to go wrong for it to happen. What if you begin to see themes emerging that really doesn't align with your problem, with your research question, right? You begin to see these themes arising, and it causes you to, there's something that have gone awry there. I don't know. Maybe the researcher didn't have the right research question. I'm not trying to describe the what went wrong with the researcher. I'm just trying to say, how do you solve for if you're getting themes that are really not aligned with the research question? What do you do? Do you go back and realign the question?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Remember, you are creating the themes yourself based on the codes that you yourself created as well, unless you're using a software program in which the software has created the codes and then created themes. What I often do in my own research is, if I have a bunch of themes or codes that don't seem to be related to anything specific in my research, I put them on the parking lot, and I call them miscellaneous. And I don't throw them away because they're really important. You don't want to throw them in the trash. You want to keep them. You want to examine like what's really going on here. And once you've addressed all of your other themes, you look at this group of themes and try and understand like what could be the possible reason for this theme? Like, is this a reverse of another theme? Is it the other way of looking at another theme? Or is it something completely different? And remember, you don't want to throw anything away. And this is where qualitative research is very deep and specific, because you as a researcher are then going to have to explain what those themes are. You're not going to throw them away because remember, it's valuable information. Something's happening here that's unexpected, that doesn't seem to fit with my research questions, but they've developed, these themes have developed anyway, or I as a researcher have developed them. They haven't magically come about. But this is what's emerging from the data. Is this possibly related to one of my research questions or not? And again, you'd report on it either as a part of a research question or as a different section where you'd actually say, this emerged, was not part of the study's purpose, it was not part of the research questions, but it's important to consider. And then you'd have to explain why it's important to consider. How does it relate to your overall topic? Remember, it's obviously going to be related to your topic because it's all coming from your transcripts. It's just that you didn't expect it, right?
Right.
So I know these can be very jarring situations and like even a bit uncomfortable, but qualitative analysis is uncomfortable. It is about getting out of your comfort zone and really tackling the data head on in terms of what your participants are telling you, what their voices are. So It's all part of the beauty of qualitative research. It's like an artist who paints a picture and suddenly they see into it, or someone says, hey, I see a dog over there. And they're like, oh, wow, I never painted a dog, but I see what you mean. There's a dog's head over there. So it's kind of like that you don't want to throw away. You're not going to go paint over it, but yeah, that just happened. And that's interesting. It's an interesting development. So see these things as interesting developments and important in their own right, and try and explain them to the best of your ability, given your understanding of the topic and the literature.
Thank
Hope
you.
that
Great
helped.
answer. Thank you.
I've also have one more hand up, it looks like.
Okay.
Is it Pia?
Here, you're on mute.
Oh,
There.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I just I missed part of your presentation, Dr. Bloomberg, but I wanted to ask if a qualitative study, if the statistics are included, like the numbers, like, you know, a ratio regarding race or age, is it discriminatory to mention the statistics in the qualitative study?
No, you can bring some statistics in. It's not going to make it a mixed method study, but for example, if you're reporting on demographics, you can use statistics. You just wouldn't use your statistics in your qualitative analysis with themes, because that's not part of qualitative analysis. And you also wouldn't use, I don't know if you were here when I spoke about content analysis, which is counting codes. You're not going to be counting anything, but you can use statistics, or even very basic statistics like means and medians, mode, to report on demographics. You know, your participants that are, is that what you mean? Like your participants, there were 20% women and
Yeah, like that.
30% were under the age of 30, you know, things like that. Yes, you can use, of course, you can use statistics for that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I see Adrian has their hand up.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Bloomberg.
Hi.
Question. So if I want to code artifacts or other things that are pertinent, they're not the participants talking, but they in of themselves do speak. How do I do that?
There is a wonderful book by Rose on visual analysis. And so that book really explains how to code artifacts, artworks, pieces of, you know, texts that are not actual participants' words, like from an interview. So if you take a look, Adrian, at some of the qualitative research books out there, and the book by Rose in particular, there are some excellent ones that talk about how to do that sort of analysis that you're referring to.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate
And good to see you.
Good to see you also.
What is a good number of participants to have that is manageable for new researchers?
This question is always a tricky one, because some studies can have 4 or 5 people and some studies can have 15 or 18. It really just depends on how many research participants you want in your sample to be a robust enough sample that will give you a good amount of data. I like between like 12 and 15-ish. But some studies are much more intense. They may be like phenomenology, where you only have like 5 or 6 people. Some studies can have 2 or 3 people, but that's not common. Remember, you're not going to have a representative sample, because you're not doing non-probability sampling, as is the case of quantitative research. So you're not going to have hundreds of people, but you also don't want like a tiny little amount, which is not going to give you a good amount of rich data. So again, something to play around with and something to discuss with your dissertation chair.
Love all of your sessions. I really appreciate you. And just as a reminder, we're going to go ahead and post the recording in the GSSC Skill Up section. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks everyone. Bye.